Walu with Baka Phoenix Books, and I want to say welcome to the launch of the new book by CJ Cherryh and Jane S. Fancher, Defiance. Ah, hi. Um, this is the 22nd book in the Foreigner series, and I'd love to start by introducing our authors. With more than 80 books to her credit and the winner of 3 Hugo Awards, C.J. Cherryh is one of the most prolific and highly respected authors in the science fiction field. She has been named a Damon Knight Memorial Grandmaster by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, and she lives in Washington State. Born in Renton, Washington, Jane S. Fancher grew up raising and training horses, learning to fly a plane, studying piano, singing, drawing, and studying math, physics, and astronomy and anthropology. She later joined a project to produce a graphic adaptation of C.J. Cherryh's Gate of Ivral, which led her to her new home in Oklahoma City, where she found her calling and began writing. She now lives in Spokane, Washington, with her partner, CJ Cherryh. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for being here with us. I wanted to start with a short reading from the new novel. If you can, just about 5-10 minutes, just to give us a sense of the world, the writing.
Okay. I can do that, but not without the glasses. All right. Oh, and it was raining. Had been raining. Of course it was raining. His neck ached from last night. He was still tired, still muddled, and still unhappy with himself that he had brought this trouble home with him. Issues unresolved, that was the problem. Were they staying or were they going? His staff at Najida had a right to hear from him, but they were still under communications silence. The Transportation Guild would call, and no, they would not, could not. Damn the communications blackout. It was possible, Najida Station being generally unmanned, that Ramasso had no idea the train was even coming. How were they to get transport? Someone had to call Najida on regular comm. It was a damned long hike, even for him. The Dowager certainly could not travel in one of the runabouts. Was she even in charge? Was it possible Kennedy was giving all the orders? It was even possible the red train was dumping every car but hers to take her on to the medical facilities in Kobo as quickly as possible. God, but why offload the wardrobe cases, which could as easily sit on the train? He had clothes in his own closet in Najida Estate. He should make that call. Security be damned. They were within his province. It was his area, and his Eddie, Major D, Ramasso, was very apt to forget his fluency in Ragi if unreasonably pushed by Ragi authority. Panachiji, we will need the bus and the truck. Is there any relaxation of the order for silence? Thunder boomed over the racket of the train. Banachu said, Kennedy said he would call. Well, that was a relief. And not. It was, damn it, still his province, his staff, his train station, and his Aishid that was being ordered about with no grace of an answer to previous questions, as if their loyalty or competence could be an issue. Anger? Yes. But there was also a leaden concern. One sort of thing might rate this kind of silence that had begun to gnaw at him last night. If Illicity had died, that news would have to be kept absolutely quiet until they could get to the capital. It might even warrant letting the Lord of Najida and a large number of guild off at Najida while the red train made a different sort of run north. If Kennedy was acting on Tabini's orders, no, that was absolutely excessive. Tabini would never keep him ignorant, and Kennedy could be a damned pain, especially under her orders. She had to be in charge, which was why they were getting nothing from Kennedy, which brought him right back to why. Was she just generally set on her way and consulting no one, avoiding any and all interference with her intentions, or was he being shut out because he had failed in whatever she thought he should have done? In Caperna, he had had his orders from her. She had sent him to Brigani's home to represent those orders, allowing her to stay in the relative safety of the train with all her Aishid. And under his administration of the situation, Brigani's daughter Husai had been kidnapped. Nomari had eluded his guard and disappeared, to turn up later, and they had made a deal with a scoundrel. It had all worked out eventually, but the cap on it all, none of his fault, had been Tiajo's escape from Amarja, capital of the Doja Sigan, accomplished before they had even left Hasturan, so she could not blame him for that. But might she have sent one of her 2 naval ships after that fugitive ship? Had her grandson not stolen one of the warships she had stolen from him and moved it out of Caperna harbor to block the Doja Sigan port? Both ships were thus engaged. Neither was available to pursue Tiajo, Tabini having decided to take on the Doja Sigan while she dealt with Sinjin. But did she remotely think the Paidi Aiji had had any part in Tabini's move? Jane?
Did she believe he had known from the start that Tabini would send a train full of guilds speeding past them in Hasturan? Or that Gaigi would send down that lander, complete with a new secure communication system, which allowed Tabini to order things from the convenience of his office in Shejidan and take over her operation? He had not expected any of it. Nobody had warned him of any of these things. None of them were his doing, and it was not his fault that Tabini's forces were currently pummeling the hell out of whatever supporters of the Shadow Guild could still be found in the northern Marid, while the core of the problem spread to the west coast. Tabini was finishing Ilicidi's war for her, outright taking over her operation as well as one of her ships, and she had pulled out of Caperna before the gunfire had even died away. Not running from the fight, never, Ilicidi. Going after that escaped ship, he had no question, the train being what she had for pursuit, and shutting out the Paidi Aiji ever since, not receiving him, not listening to him, not trusting him with her plans, not knowing, damn it, how much those plans would affect his responsibilities at Najida. And that might be the point, might it not? He was not a atevi, might not have the overwhelming, gut-deep drive to protect his own. She did. More of that gut-deep emotion, that primal drive, than she admitted to. As he, gut-deep, came at the same conclusion by a different route, with different wiring, different imperatives, did she think he would fail to care? In its diverse senses, did not even translate well into Ragi. Trying to equate what she felt with what he felt, stepped right off the logic of it all into that vast gulf between what was atevi and what was human. She was going to do something. Days of dogged movement across a long, badly maintained rail said that if she was still in command, she was either mad at Tabini or set on pursuit, or both. She just did not want him making calls to Tabini. That had been clear. Could she, thunderbolt of a convoluted thought, possibly think that he had had one of those new communication units all along and was still using it? It was possible, as she might see it, that Tabini had handed him one of those units before he left Shejidan. He had understood Kanedi had gotten them from Tabini's force when the train stopped to watch the landing, but that did not preclude Tabini having given him one earlier, before he ever boarded in Shejidan. Certainly the operational shift onto the new network all had been pre-planned somewhere, dependent on Gaigi getting a lander down to do that job. But he had not been in on that planning, not in the least. He had been one of the least knowledgeable individuals in the whole operation, with the possible exception of Nomari and Brigani. But in her reckoning, it could be. He could have such a unit. Kanedi had not gone so far as to order a search of his premises. She had stopped short of that. And if he had such a unit, he could have known things about Tabini's operation, being in Tabini's confidence, that even Kanedi might not know. It was ridiculous if she truly believed that he would deceive her after all this time, but no, if she believed he and his Aishid had crossed her, he would not be standing here a free man. Perhaps she was supposed to have stayed up in Hasturan. Perhaps she was not supposed to have taken the red train with all its equipment down that horrendous grade. Tabini had certainly not been ignorant that 2/3 of his naval force supposed to be in the strait official barrier between human Mphsphera and the Atevi mainland, was headed instead for the Mareed. Perhaps she was not supposed to have made the move on Brigani, turning him from adversary to ally. If one removed Brigani and Coperna from the operation, the lander could have come down. The new communications system could have gone into operation, leaving her informed but safe in Hosteron, to simply reverse the red train and go tamely, safely, back to Shejdan. Her part in the operation done. Never, never, not LSD.
That was wonderful. Thank you. You know what stands out to me both in reading, because I've only read the first book, but in everything that I've heard and read in so far is just how complex and unique the Atevi are as a species, and it's one of the things that so many of your readers have commented on, that they're such a uniquely singular alien species with complex social structures and consistent but consistently alien properties, right? Um, what sparked this? Like, what was the initial spark for the creation of this particular species?
It's an interesting question. I can remember sketching. I was sitting at my desk in the former house, in front of the big windows, and thinking what book I was going to do next. And I began to draw. And I drew. And I drew. And it became this male person, very, very tall, very powerful. I created Banshee.
Very dark.
Very dark. And he was surrounded by all this ornate Baroque stuff, and a sort of a complex civilization, and and this attitude that this sketch had. I probably still have the sketch somewhere, but Banshee came first before Bren. And I thought, all right, this person comes from a complex background. I mean, obviously, I don't know this person yet. He's standing here, but clearly he doesn't belong in this living room. He's from a different place, and if I can, how would I introduce that? And I thought, I need a narrator that is going to be able to understand this and interpret it, because I just feel like that's going to be necessary. And so that became Bren. And then once I had the two of them, everybody else began to appear.
Carolyn, if I might jump in here, because this I mean, I was there when she was creating it all, but one of the interesting things about the Atevi and the humans is that they are close enough for them to make mistakes that they think they understand each other.
Yes.
And that is the absolute crux of the entire series. And in the little bit that we read there, where he was talking about the feelings, care does not have an Atevi equivalent, and it's actually on a biological level, which is something Carolyn's done a lot of alien species, and there's always something biological about them that's different. And what's interesting about this one is that she took this psychological ramification of a physiological difference. They are genetically, chemically, fundamentally slightly skewed from what we understand. Their drive. What's been interesting to me when I started working on them in just the last handful, I was working on my own stuff when she started it. And what was interesting, has become interesting to me, is through the youngster, Cherryh, the Ige's kid and heir, she has finally really begun to clarify this fundamental difference that has been problematic, and we finally, as readers, are getting a chance to truly understand it. And it's been fascinating because it's been the ramifications of this fundamental psychological, physiological difference for 15, 16 books. And then Cherryh comes along and we finally get a different viewpoint. We've done it all from Bren's viewpoint. So it's been fun for me because as a reader, I was a beta reader before, and I would edit and so forth. But when we began these last three books really working closely together, I got to really put her under the fire and make her explain some of this stuff. And it's been great fun. So anyway, knowing how she works, I suspect that was something that came out in the first handful of reactions between Bren and the atevi. Am I right, Carolyn? The whole, just what is it that's going to be the problem?
Yeah, it definitely did. And I decided that for various reasons, he would be the only human who has to deal in this society. And so he has to understand. He's not even got a sounding board. And they are very different, and both he and his intimate household struggle at times with the differences, but they make it work. And
Can I make a guess, Carolyn?
Mm-hmm.
I think that once you thought of this thing, I think you put Bren there alone because what you really wanted to investigate was the atevi.
Absolutely.
And having once we bring the humans in, and once we bring Mosfera in, and once he goes into space and so forth, the dynamic is different. And before you do that, you have to have established that fundamental. I think you were just curious about the atevi, and you wanted to explore that for. Okay, I'll shut up.
And I created Bren to be as different as is possible to be. I made him a little athletic. I mean, he was a skier in his youth. He's got a few years on him now, and I think he's beginning to get his gray hairs. But I saw that the difference was going to become important, but it is also the fact that he is driven to understand in a way that his predecessor, who was an absolute disaster, that was bounced out by Tabini.
Carolyn, explain what his predecessor means. Explain what the Aishidi'tat is.
Oh,
please.
the Aishidi'tat. Humans lost the War of the Landing. They were relatively few. They came down, they threw their weapons around, they swaggered a bit, and then the atevi got mad. And they bounced them all over to an island, which they're not permitted to leave except for one human. In atevi tradition, you get to have a representative in the court of your enemy. A person who has binding authority, he can negotiate, and he is also, in his case, the translator. He is a person who has studied the very difficult atevi language. And
there have been several Aishidi'tat before him. He is the current one when so many changes come down for the atevi.
Right. When it started out, they were composing a dictionary, which was getting fatter and fatter. But there was never any attempt to actually speak directly to the atevi, who it was believed to be too dangerous. The misunderstandings could be too great. The repercussions unthinkable. And Tabini trapped him into actually talking. And once the two
Tabini
of them
is the leader of the IG. He is the IG of all the atevi.
Yeah, and so he sort of appropriated Bren and Bren is absolutely fascinated. Of course, this is the study of his life. He got into this study in curiosity, and of course now he is allowed to be in on a whole lot of things he never planned for. He's now become a sort of Secretary of State.
We probably should let her say something.
Yes,
I
think
you see why we work together a lot.
What I find so interesting about this is that, like, there are, when we talk about first contact, in science fiction, it's often based on having contact with a singular, alien species that all do things the same way. They all speak the same language. They're the aggressive aliens. They're the peaceful aliens. They're the this aliens. Whereas what I've seen spool out in across 22 books is something so much more complex, and this immersive, non-human world building. How much of what you understand of, like, diplomacy and contact between, alien cultures, have you taken from real life first contact scenarios that sort of define the colonial, uh, I wouldn't call it an experiment, but colonial conquest, particularly what we know as, like, the primary European contact with, say, like, indigenous peoples or African peoples or Australian peoples. So, like, how much of that, when you were doing sort of the research around the complex diplomacies, the world building, the alien cultures, how much of that did you draw from?
I would say, well, for one thing, I have taught ancient history. I was a teacher at one point, and so I know ancient history well. I know modern history fairly well, and I have Earth is kind of a textbook of how not to do first contact. I mean, we have messed each other up so much, and in very few instances, the determined contactors have run face up against a civilization that they couldn't quite roll over. But too often, they start in one or two, and then they come in droves. And the atevi perhaps were very smart when they limited it to one human, just one human that they are willing to have contact with. And the rest
Well,
of them
and
can sit on their island.
one of the differences, Carolyn, if I can interrupt, please. Sorry.
Oh,
One of the
go.
differences in the situation that she has here is the humans who thought they were going to be, with their weapons and everything else, able to dominate, actually weren't. And unfortunately, in our case, too often the Europeans have been successful in dominating the indigenous peoples. And what I love about these books is that they are about compromise. That's Bren's job, is to figure out how to make disparate persons work together. And I'm actually rereading them for the first time in years. And every night I come in and I say something to Carol about, this was so cool how you set this up. It's something that as a reader, I just kind of took for granted when I was reading them initially, even when I was doing the final beta edit, alpha edit. Maybe I'm an alpha editor. I don't know. But there are things that I just, now being in a position of working on them and helping her to develop some of the stuff actively, my appreciation for how Bren gets around everything. And it's stuff that actually would work. He has to figure out how to make this work. And it would do well for some of the modern politicians to read these books.
Mm. It is definitely something that I love about how complex the diplomacy in it is, and that's kind of like, for me, one of the richest veins within the books is
Yeah.
the way that even the slightest, like, turn of the head, Like a little bit of a, a movement of the hand can mean so much, and also not mean anything at all. And it's up to this person to like try to figure that out. So I feel like it reveals this ongoing focus on systems and system building, which I've seen in both books. And I wonder about that. Did you, for instance, create an atevi language? Like, is it like Klingon? Is it something that could be learned in real life? Like, it seems so complex and rich that I find it difficult to believe that it doesn't exist somewhere.
I have a vocabulary list, so I try to be consistent at least. I have never.
She also taught Latin. She understands languages, and so she fakes it really well.
I taught Latin, and yes, I did, and I've been a language student myself. So Brenda's a little autobiographical, trying to get across a concept that another human language does not have is difficult enough. When you're going across biology, I figure Bren has to be a fairly smart cookie.
Yeah, imagine.
You had more actual atevi words in the earlier books, didn't you, Carolyn? Was there a reason for that, just to establish the difference, or?
Partly, yeah. Essentially so, that there were things that, for one thing, now he understands the language natively. I mean, it's as natural to him. He lives in it 24/7, year round. So he's not as aware of running up against the impenetrable word as he was when he was just starting out. There are still, however, a few things that baffle him.
I imagine it's now more concepts than it is certain like vocabulary. Like,
yeah, he's sort of gone off into the the medium level pool, and now he's sort of beginning to navigate the deep end.
Yeah, as someone who has spent most of their lifetime trying to learn both French and my native language, Igbo, I feel for him. I really do.
Yeah.
You guys talked about the act of collaboration. So you're married and you both worked on a lot of different things before you even ran, I think, or are running a publishing house together. How has it been collaborating actively on the writing versus doing your own work and reading each other's works, but now you're having to sit down together and sort of put the words together? What's been the difference? Like, what's been the experience?
We've always talked story, and the talking story, we go on long car trips. I mean, for us, lighting out and doing 800 miles in a day, a 2,000-mile buzz to the south and back again, gives you a lot of time to talk and think and read. We go on reading trips sometimes when we've got something new, and so shutting out the world and confining it to a small space where no doorbell can ring or anything. Jane is having a thought, I can tell.
It's actually been a pretty steady progression. When we first met, I had never written. I had done a little bit with graphic novels, and Carolyn very graciously allowed me access to Gate of Ivrel to do a graphic novel that never got finished because, unfortunately, not my fault, the publishing house
went down in flames.
To exist.
Yeah,
okay. I was gonna ask, how would you have been responsible for that? What did you do?
Because my book was one of them, and if it sold better than, but at any rate, when that happened, when I first started working on that, I was living with my brothers, and she was going to come visit us. She would, and when she I'm sorry, she was in Renton for a convention and she stayed with us for a while. And I would sit and work on the graphic while she would read Citeen to me. She had just started Citeen, which is one of her Hugo Award-winning novels. And I would give her feedback. I would react, I would ask the right questions and that kind of thing. And it became the joke of the house when she went home that I would get a phone call every night at 9 o'clock because rates changed in Oklahoma at 11. And she would read me what she had written that day and we would talk, I would react. And that went on until the graphic died. And it was a case of, what do I do now? And she said, try writing. And when I began writing, it was really kind of the same. She would read what I wrote and react. I was at that time reading what she wrote and react. And it just became increasingly where, sometimes she would go in and actually actively edit what I had written. And then she started turning her stuff over to me to actively edit. So it's really, it's been a progression of that interaction. We had go ahead, Carolyn.
There was one moment when I was looking at the text, the background text for the graphic novel, and I was reading something she had written, I thought. But then I thought, maybe that's mine or hers. I can't tell the difference. And the fact is that we got to where we work like that. And just occasionally we'll say, well, gee, that was a brilliant line. And then she'd say, no, you wrote that.
And in actual fact, our stories are quite different. The kind of story that I tell natively, my Ring books and my Netwalkers books are a different kind of story. But when we start editing each other, we slip very easily into the other's voice and into the other's thought patterns. And since we both approach it as we're neither of us what you would call real outline control freaks. We kind of punt. We punt page to page, and then you have to figure out how to make it all work out.
And the house began to slide down the hill. Take it, Jane.
Anyway, so there are the shoot from the hip typewriters, and there are the outline writers. And fortunately, when I started writing, and in fact, the one little bit that I tried writing when I was in high school, where my teacher managed to turn me off writing for the next 15 years, I was doing the exact same thing. She complained because it didn't read like a finished work, and I said, I'm just getting to know him. And I didn't realize that was legitimate. She chastised me in very, you aren't writing, you aren't creating art, you're just being self-indulgent. And it was like, okay, I'm going back to my art. that's my creative outlet, is my art. And it took Carolyn to get me back at it.
As a former teacher, I just boil when I hear that story.
That makes me just when I hear that. Like,
teachers really need to be anybody dealing with artistic endeavors needs to keep their mouth shut unless they understand all the different ways that people or can ask questions more than they
encourage, never discourage.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you say that, because reading up on both your biographies, there is such a huge range of interests that you guys have between you. I mean, skating, photography, horseback riding, fencing, music. You can fly a plane, Jane. That's insane.
My dad had a flight school. I could get it probably in the air and probably down safe again. It's been a long time. I never actually got my license.
Way more than most of us can say. So
yeah.
I just want to, like, how do you find, you have such a wide range of personal interests? How do they intersect and interact with writing? Or is this just one, is writing just one of the things you do? Or is it sort of the central thing that all your interests come back to? Like, how does that all work out?
It's it's
And where do you
it's
find
it's
the time?
it's like you're always writing. I mean, it's always going on in your head. We get ideas from time to time, and um, they flow right through our fingers onto the page fairly easily. Jane will say, "Well, I've got this idea," or I'll say, I think this and such happens," and we talk about it. And but our understanding of the characters is so similar that it's like I can be surprised by what she pulled, but it's always in character. So
Um,
it's
in answer to how I interpret the question, my feeling is that that diverse background and an awful lot of that, I mean, we're old, we're old. We've had a lot of years to play with all those things. And the thing is that as a writer, and as I say, we are a shoot from the hip, you get them into a situation. The options your characters have for solving the equation is directly corresponds to what options you personally would have, which are all related to the experiences you've had. So the very fact that what we depend on, it has nothing to do with formula, which is absolutely, I mean, there's nothing wrong with writing to formula, but ours, I tell you, there's no formula. There's what happens and how are they going to make it work, and or are they going to sit down and say, I'm not that stupid. And that your options, your chances of writing something different expand exponentially with the number of experiences you've had and the number of things. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I was going to say, it's being the kind of person that if the guide says, "Who wants to ride the camel?" your hand shoots up immediately. And I think that's the way both of us approach life. Who wants to try this? Me. And you can gather all kinds of experiences. I've done everything from a link trainer to to a camel, and an elephant. But it's all it's all part of the goes into the mill and it comes out story.
I love that. Goes into the mill and comes out story. Love that. We have a couple of questions from listeners. First one
Hi,
from
listeners.
the first one is from Julie Cherneda. Hi, Julie. She says, I love how Bren comes to be surrounded by staff. Those relationships are strong and powerful, incredibly helpful. How much of that was wish fulfillment from a very busy writer?
I wish I could clone me. Yeah. But it's like when you teach, you get surrounded not by subjects, but by people that teach you things as well as you're teaching them. And I have always when working with groups of students on projects and so on and so forth, you find the most amazing talents pop up, and the ways of working with each other, things you learn about whoever you're with that they can do that that is just a very useful thing, and learning to integrate those abilities into something that is larger than larger than any of you. As it's I guess you'd call it an art form, but it's something that I have always enjoyed doing, is working with people and getting a group to happen.
You also, Bren is child-sized among the atevi.
Yes.
He is in increasingly life-threatening situations. And the need for staff that can be trusted in this particular society is absolutely vital. And it's also a side effect of the Manchi that drives the entire society. He needs to have, as now a lord, but as a person of importance, he needs to have that pyramid underneath him that keeps him from being assassinated.
Yeah. And
Because
the whole
assassination is how things get done in this world.
And when you have somebody that is constantly saving your life, and that you have made the mistake of trying to save their lives, it's that is, I think having, of course, then there's the staff that answers all his letters. I want that staff. I want that staff. That does all the paperwork.
Secretary, yeah.
I want the paperwork staff that he has. But I think that's wish fulfillment.
His paperwork staff now occupies an entire office floor.
Oh God, I need that. I just want somebody to come in and wash my dishes. Just
that
wash
too.
the dishes and leave. That's all I ask.
Cook gourmet meals. I mean, he's got them all.
Wash the dishes, cook, then wash the dishes, then leave. Yeah. Another question from That Cat Will Stray. Great name, by the way. Any favorite authors or music when you need inspiration, when you guys are doing your work?
I don't read as much. The eyes, I generally save my vision for my work. But in the past, I've been a voracious reader, and I collect all sorts of things. And of course, I've read a lot of the classics. I mean, you teach Latin, you're going to run into this sort of thing. And not to mention the Greek and the whatever have you. But in general, I collect stuff, and I admire certain writing styles. I look at it, I analyze it, and I'll steal a bit now and again. But basically,
I call it inspiration.
yeah. But I think my dad particularly would bring me home books from his travels, and books and turtles. He would stop for wounded turtles, and so I had a turtle hospital and a growing library.
And I'm the world's slowest reader and probably the worst read author in the history of writers. And once I started writing myself, I was terrified that I was going to copy someone. And so I really kind of stopped reading because I didn't want the, what is it you call it, Carolyn, the copyright police? I didn't want them coming after me. So I can pretty much legitimately claim that any similarity between my work and anyone else's is purely coincidental. I really, there are, I have a few friends that I read their stuff, but I am very, very, very slow reader. That's one reason I'm a good editor, I suppose, but it doesn't exactly, I mean, I can edit one person or two people, her and me. So I wish I were better read. I have a bunch of books downstairs I want to read. I have a bunch of books on the Kindle I want to read. And I don't know when I'm going to get time because Wishu always is demanding new clothes. So, I like to create things more than consume them, I think, is what it boils down to. I think Carolyn's kind of the same way. She likes the free time tends to go more in the direction. We have a big garden. I had to put this up. I was very sad because you could see the koi pond out there, but the sunlight was too bright behind. But we have a big koi pond, and we put gardens all around the house, and we did it all ourselves with our little mantis tiller and lots of.
And now we've got to weed it.
And now we have to weed it. I gotta have a weeding party next spring. I just can't handle it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You guys are living my best life.
Oh,
I want to grow up to be you.
oh,
Um,
thank you.
I did want to ask, because we have about 10 more minutes, and I wanted to ask you both. You've both been in the genre. You guys have been at this for such a long time.
30. How could we be?
I mean, when Foreigner came out, I'm not going to say how old I was because that's going to date me, but I was not that. I was young. But the question I wanted to ask is, you've seen so much come and go in the genre, and you must have seen trends, you must have seen evolutions. How has science fiction, that small part of the speculative fiction genre, how has it changed since you started writing in it? And what have been some of the most surprising things that you've witnessed?
Cell
Um,
phones.
yeah, there are cell phones. I
Cell
invented them
phones.
when I was 10. I had everybody with access to a phone everywhere they were, though it was nailed to the wall. But uh, I think uh, we didn't. Oh, I didn't when I first started out doing my own stories. I did not think that I would have a real life space program chasing me all the way. I think that is one of the biggest surprises. Um, because when I started out, I could get a couple of astronomy books from the library that differed violently about how many moons Jupiter had. It taught me to look at copyright dates at a very young age because otherwise there was no answer to that problem. And uh, we went from just barely being able to look at the stars to now really looking at the stars in up
And
close and personal.
all the stuff I studied no longer makes sense. And it's fabulous.
Yeah.
As far as changes in books, I think a good book is a good book. And I think people are when I started my first series, it has to do with a same gender relationship, which I swore I was not going to do, but because I had a lot to say about how people were handling it, the handful of people that were, and I wanted to handle it as a relationship, not as a thinly veiled attempt to make social commentary on the current world. I would say the nice change that I've seen is that even though my distribution was, shall we say, not the best on that, I think I scared the publisher. I shouldn't say that, but I think I did. Because I tried to make it a human situation rather than a 20th century gay situation. And one of the nicest compliments, sympathy compliments I get is that I was about 10 years ahead of my time. And for that, I'm grateful, because I like books that, the great thing about science fiction for me is that it can take a social situation or a technological situation that exists or could exist and make it applicable or understandable. It's the ability. I'm sorry about my phone. Nobody ever calls me, and I've had 2 calls already. I love the way that it gives you an environment in which, for instance, with Stephen and Wesley, I could just let the story happen and I didn't have to explain the difficulties. I mean, this is a society, and it's just in passing, where gender is fairly fluid. It is the relationship that was the matter. And my dad, who was conservative as all get out, his reaction, he read it. I didn't know he was reading it. He told me, I have only one complaint. I stayed up all night reading it. And it was like, yes. So that's what I want. I want people to enjoy the story, and then kind of, again, the great thing about science fiction is you can put it in a different milieu, a different scenario in which you can focus on other aspects that are not quite so charged. And I'm not saying this very well. I apologize for that, but it's a great milieu to work in, because if I were to write something contemporary, I couldn't write it without dealing with the current socio-political situation. Whereas with this, I could just
take up half the book.
Yeah, take up the whole book. So it's that's why I love the genre in general, is that we have a playground where we can experiment. Yeah.
A literature of ideas.
Yeah.
And it's fun because that's exactly why I write speculative fiction too, because reality is great, but I like stretching it. I love being able to go in and just sort of like, okay, I don't like this part of society, edit that out. I don't like,
yeah.
I really like this, let's put that in there, and it's one of my favorite things about working in speculative fiction. And so it's amazing to hear you guys both talk about that. So what's next for you? This is the last question. We've got 4 minutes. So what can readers expect from this being the first of a planned trilogy? And what else are you doing? Where can readers find more about what is it you're up to?
We're working also on another Alliance Union book, and we kind of divide labor. Right now, I'm handling Bren, and Jane is working on the continuation of the Alliance Union story, and then we'll work for a while, and then we'll switch, and I think we get to read what the other one's done, and then say, and then, and go from there for a while until we get whoever it is royally stuck, and then say, here, and yeah, it's how we work. Because one person's mess is another person's springboard.
We're hoping that the writing is going to start going a little faster now. We've had kind of COVID. 2020 for us was not COVID. It was bionic hips, and Carolyn had a pretty serious thing that she's all better now. And then I lost my brother last year, and I was the executor for his estate, and all of that just kind of ate into the
it's like
creative energy as much as
up for you.
yeah. So we've had kind of a busy handful of years, and it slowed the writing up, but we are coming out the other side now, and we're kind of able to start checking things off the list. So we're hoping that we'll get both Bren and Alliance going again. The Alliance Union universe is her sort of future history for the, sorry, I'm eating my hair. Her future history for Earth. The Foreigner series is kind of a little offshoot of all this. And
way over there.
as a real fan of the Alliance Union books, when the question first came up about our doing a collaboration, I said, I want the answers to some questions. So we're filling in some of the blanks on the Alliance Union. And I believe that Alliance Unbound will probably be the next book out, won't it, Carolyn?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
should be. Should be.
Yeah, that should be the next one, probably next spring.
Or this winter. I'm not sure yet. Maybe they're not sure yet. So
Maybe they're not sure yet. They don't tell us these things. We have had I have to say, we have had Betsy Walheim. I have to give her big kudos here. She has been throughout this very difficult period for us, immensely patient. And thank you, Betsy.
yes,
She's
very
at
much so.
DAW, our editor at DAW, and she has been amazing, and we are very, very grateful. So I just thought I should say that. And
Right.
And we are hoping to start turning them out faster now.
Well, we are all looking forward to it. Thank you both so much for your time. This has been I still have like a bunch of questions I could be asking, but I'm gonna let y'all go. But honestly, this was great.
We'll have to do it again.
Yes.
And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been great fun. This is our first podcast, or whatever we're calling them now. And thank you for making it a whole lot of fun.
Thank you so much. You guys take care. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the launch of CJ Cherryh and Jane S. Fancher's Defiance, novel number 22 in the Foreigner series. Grab your copy. It is out today. And let us know what you think, okay? Thank you so much. Take care and have a good evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I believe we're off, Carolyn.
I believe we are.
I hope we are, or people are going to think we're really crazy.
Well, I'm going to close down here, which seems to be the best way to